Iran's first direct attack on Israel was full of sound and fury. By Israel's count, 150 ballistic and cruise missiles, bringing the Middle East to the moment of maximum danger many predicted. Though Iran insists this was not intended to start a war. The Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem is perhaps the most hotly disputed territory on earth. And last night, the sky above it was too. This was the moment Operation True Promise was launched by Iran's Revolutionary Guard. These generals settling a very personal vendetta after 7 of their colleagues were killed in an Israeli airstrike. In the first wave were some 140 kamikaze drones. They're known as flying lawnmowers because of their noise. But by daylight it was clear the damage was minimal. Israel's air defences intercepted most of the weapons, though a 7-year-old girl was injured. This missile landed in a northern Iraqi village. British and American warplanes shot many of them down. Though from Israel, no talk of victory.
The campaign is not over yet. We need to remain prepared and attentive. At the same time, we blocked the first wave and we did it with great success.
This was a dangerous and unnecessary escalation, which I've condemned in the strongest terms. I can confirm that our planes did shoot down a number of Iranian attack drones, and I want to pay tribute to the bravery and professionalism of our pilots flying into the face of danger to protect civilians.
Early this morning, Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke to President Biden, who reportedly urged him from the White House to accept that Israel had won, adding that the US would not participate in a counterattack. But it took 6 months before Mr. Biden criticised Israel's leader over the ruinous war in Gaza. And who knows if America can head off a wider war now. Some Iranians celebrated after being told by their media that the operation was a great success, with 50% of missiles hitting Israeli military targets. One Revolutionary Guard commander talked ominously about more such attacks if provoked by Israel, though the official line remains: we had to respond and we told you we would.
We announced to the White House in a message this morning that our operations will be limited and minimal. The aim is our legitimate defense and the punishment of the Israeli regime.
From our point of view, this operation is over and there is no intention of continuing it. But if the Zionist regime takes any action against the Islamic Republic, our next operation will be much larger.
Israel may have made a serious mistake with this unacknowledged airstrike in Damascus a fortnight ago, in thinking that Iran would not dare retaliate directly. But Iran's mistake may be even bigger. The next slap will be harder, reads this anti-Israeli banner in Tehran, though Iranian weakness was exposed last night. So Israel's war cabinet has been weighing up whether to deliver a crushing blow to the only nation still prepared to fight them, though talk of a regional coalition seems far-fetched for now.
In the face of the Iranian threat, we will build a regional coalition and exact the price from Iran in a way and at a time that is right for us. Faced with our enemy's desire to hurt us, we will continue to unite and become stronger.
This afternoon, President Biden spoke with his fellow G7 leaders, hoping diplomacy would head off further escalation. Israel seems emboldened by its military success and by the help given by America, Britain, and even its Arab neighbours in Jordan, where this missile was shot down. The risk now is that those partners find themselves drawn in further by whatever Israel does next. So this moment of maximum danger has not yet passed.
Well, joining me live from Tel Aviv is Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, who's a spokesman for the Israel Defense Forces. Thanks very much for joining us. I mean, an attack like this, some form of retaliation, was surely inevitable after the airstrike against the consulate in Damascus.
Good evening, Jackie. Thank you for having me. I think what's more important is how we see what a group of like-minded, decent nations that come together in the name of defense and despite the diabolical intentions of Iran, we prove together that we can defend lives and save lives. And that is precisely what we did with over 300 explosive drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles that were fired at Israel over the course of the night.
But the attack itself was retaliation. It was expected. It was well telegraphed, wasn't it?
Israel has not had a confrontation with Iran since the 1st of April. Israel, and as we've seen throughout the course of the last 6 months, but also for many years, Iran is the source of everything bad in this region. They are the destabilizer of everything. They have empowered Hamas. They have financed. They have trained. They have equipped Hezbollah. They have instructed the Houthis to conduct attacks on the maritime cargo routes. So everything that is happening in this region is to do with Iran. They have been up until now behind the scenes. And yesterday they came to the front of the stage. And I think what the coalition proved in the course of the defense of Israel is that their aggression, their hostility, their attacks cannot be will not be successful, and will not be tolerated.
Well, hopefully we'll get to come on to that coalition in a moment. But Iran has said this was in retaliation for the airstrike on the consulate. They said it was always going to be a limited operation. There is no intention of continuing it now. So can this end here?
And at the same time, in the early hours of this morning, Iran's proxy, Hezbollah, launched more rocket attacks against Israel. So I don't trust Iran. I don't see why anybody should. They are the source of everything bad in this region.
So what is your assessment of what happens next then? What is your assessment of what happens next?
The IDF has presented a spectrum of options to the government. The government, as you rightly pointed out in the report, are currently convened and discussing those options. Once they come out, they will give their instructions to the IDF and we will act accordingly. I don't think it's appropriate for me to delve into the specific details. Of course, there is a price for action and a price for inaction.
So there is no question of no retaliation from Israel?
I don't know. We'll have to wait and see what the government decides.
After some weeks of tension between Israel and your key ally, the Americans, you know, the attack has seen President Biden come and reaffirm what he says is his ironclad commitment to Israel. But he's also reported to have said the US won't get involved in any military campaign against Iran. They don't want you to do anything more, do they? They want this to stop here, to not escalate this situation, which would be very damaging for a very wide region, potentially.
We have to also ask ourselves that if we don't do anything, and if Iran can be allowed to get away with launching this most extensive missile, rocket, and drone attack against Israel, and if they think that this is the new norm of the relationship, what price would it be? Will we wake up again once more to a reality of the 7th of October that instead of Hamas terrorists, it will be Iranian activists, fighters, warriors in our houses? So I think there's a strong case for action, but there are also absolutely, I would agree with the concerns of the safety and security of the region. We live here. It is at the top of our concern, but we're not willing to live under the persisting threat that the Iranian regime is conducting against us, either directly or through its proxies.
Very briefly on the issue of coalition, which you raised. We know British planes were involved. We heard the Prime Minister talking about British planes shooting down some of the drones. I mean, how would you assess the risk in countries like Britain being involved in this?
Again, I think that there is more ample reason for being involved in a coalition against a tyranny regime like Iran, the way that they have conducted themselves, how they are conducting their aggression against Israel, but not only against Israel, Iran and the IRCG are hostile across the world. They are conducting malicious activities against civilians, against people around the world. So it's the right thing. And that's why it precisely said a group of decent nations came together to defend against Israel, not only from Europe, not only America, also from the region, because everybody understands that that's the reality.
Peter Lerner, Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, got to leave it there, but thank you very much for talking to us.
Good evening, Jackie.
Now, Israel and Iran have been on a collision course since Hamas attacked Israel on October the 7th, with Iran's proxies attacking Israel from Lebanon, Syria and Yemen. But tensions between the two countries have been growing for years, with Benjamin Netanyahu warning that Iran's nuclear facilities pose an existential threat to Israel. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, looks at how we got here.
The coffins of the 7 Revolutionary Guard officers killed in Damascus were paraded through the streets of Tehran on April the 5th. It was Al-Quds Day, Iran's official day of hatred for Israel and its ally America. The leadership of the Islamic Republic said that this time it would retaliate directly rather than via one of its proxy forces, heralding a new stage in a 2 decades-long shadow war. Tension between Iran and Israel has been growing since 2005, when Iran's then President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad made a series of remarks predicting the collapse of the Jewish state while building up Iran's nuclear program. In 2006, Israel invaded Lebanon to fight Iran's proxy Hezbollah. And since 2010, Iranian nuclear scientists have been killed and nuclear facilities attacked, reportedly by Israel. In 2011, Israel seized one of several ships taking Iranian weapons to Hamas in Gaza. In 2012, Hezbollah operatives blew up a busload of Israeli tourists in Bulgaria. And since 2013, several Iranian Revolutionary Guard officers have been assassinated in Syria, again reportedly by Israel.
A red line should be drawn right here.
The Israeli Prime Minister opposed all negotiations with Iran over its nuclear program. He railed against the deal that was eventually agreed and celebrated when President Trump reneged on the agreement in 2018. Fast forward to a military graduation ceremony in Tehran 6 months ago. The supreme leader denied that Iran was behind Hamas's October the 7th attack on Israel, but praised those who carried it out. We are proud of them, he said. Hamas leaders held meetings with Iranian officials who declared an axis of resistance to Israel. Hezbollah rockets are fired into Israel from Lebanon daily, although the Hezbollah leader has suggested that they don't want a full-scale war. Israeli forces fire at Hezbollah, trying to push them back further from the border. The Houthis in Yemen, also backed by Iran, have attacked ships in the Gulf of Aden, prompting the US and the UK to send warships to the region.
This is a battle against the Iranian axis of terror, which is now threatening to close the maritime Strait of Bab el-Mandeb.
Without admitting it, Israel has been stepping up assassinations of Iranian Revolutionary Guard commanders in Syria and Iraq. Iranian leaders have been getting increasingly agitated.
We have said many times that we will not initiate war, but if anyone bullies us, then Iran will respond firmly.
At the 45th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution in February, Iran showed off its rocket systems and drones on the streets of Tehran. Now they have used them in anger, risking both retaliation from the far better armed Israel and a wider war across the Middle East.
Well, earlier I spoke to Sayed Mohammad Morandi, a professor at the University of Tehran, who was previously an advisor to Iran's nuclear negotiations team. I began by asking how the events of the last 24 hours are being viewed there.
The Iranians sent a lot of cheap and old missiles to force the Israeli regime to use its anti-missile system. So they spent maybe a couple of $1 million, the Iranians, and the Israelis spent $1.3 billion. And then the real Iranian missiles went by because the decoys did their job and those missiles hit their target. So Iran got what it wanted.
Was this a strike to send a message externally about your capability, but internally to say, yes, we've retaliated and it's done now? Was that the point of this?
The point was to change the equation, and that is what Iran has done. Until now, Iran has shown strategic patience. The Israeli regime, with Western support, has murdered Iranians in the past. And Iran didn't respond directly, especially in the last few months, because it wanted the focus to remain on the ongoing genocide in Gaza.
Isn't that exactly what this has done? It has shifted the focus away from what's happening in Gaza. And isn't one of the biggest consequences of last night's attack helping Israel pull back waning support from key allies, especially the US? They're now talking once again about ironclad commitment to Israeli security.
Well, let's not fool ourselves. The United States and the West have always had ironclad support for this genocidal regime. This genocidal is owned by the United States and the West. They are going to be remembered in history for this unprecedented genocide that we're seeing unfold in front of our eyes. The reality is that the Israeli regime struck an Iranian embassy in Syria. They murdered Iranians, and the UK, the US, and France, and the UN Security Council refused to condemn the Israeli regime. In other words, the UK government supported this attack by preventing the Israeli regime from being condemned. So Iran had no option but to defend its sovereignty and to respond to the Israeli regime aggression.
But it has taken away focus from the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And you have countries like the US, UK and France who are being very vocal about the humanitarian crisis and criticising Israel for not doing enough. Last night joining Israel's efforts to repel Iranian strikes.
Let's be serious. The UK, the United States, the West, they are part of this genocide. They have helped to create this situation. They have helped to create starvation in Gaza.
Where do you think you are left now, Iran is left now in terms of what it does next? You know, the foreign minister was saying, this is done now, this is the, you know, we always said it would be a limited operation. We hear other voices coming out of Iran saying, you know, there may be more to be done here.
The Iranians have not used their advanced missiles. They have not used their advanced drones. They've been using old equipment. And the Iranians have a huge stock of drones and missiles. So if the Israeli regime wants to continue, Iran will have the excuse to hit it harder and harder and harder. And that is exactly why the Americans want this to stop. If the Americans thought that the Israelis could win, they would give them the green light. We know
there is huge danger. There is huge danger in escalating this, isn't there? And there is huge danger in that for the Iranians too, and for the Iranian people.
Well, there's huge danger for the people of Britain and the United States, because if this war spreads, have no doubt that all American bases in the Persian Gulf region will be destroyed, and that those countries that host American bases will be guilty by association, and all those oil and gas installations will be destroyed by drones and missiles. So the smart thing to do is for the UK government, the US government, and the others to rein in their mad dog and to stop murdering children.
Sayed Mohammed Morandi, thank you very much for talking to us today.
Thank you.
Well, Iran's retaliatory strikes have forced President Biden to reiterate his rock-solid support for Israel, which had been seriously strained by the rising death toll in Gaza. And with G7 leaders warning that Iran risks provoking an uncontrollable regional escalation, he's under pressure to stop a wider war. Kieran Moodley has more from Washington.
The world is waking up to a new inflection point in the war in the Middle East.
Joe Biden's foreign policy pitch was that he'd restore calm after the chaos of Donald Trump. This wasn't what he had planned.
President Biden is also under pressure to rein in the Israeli prime minister.
The president was ensconced in the Situation Room last night, in constant contact with the Israelis, with the Americans helping to bring down Iranian drones and missiles. A success, but also a failure of Washington's attempt at containing this conflict after October the 7th. Part of that is down to Biden's relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu. It was shortly after the Hamas attack that Biden warned Israel to not make the same mistakes the US did after 9/11.
While we sought justice and got justice, we also made mistakes.
Yet Netanyahu has embraced American weapons, but not words, with tensions rising as Washington criticizes Israel's conduct in Gaza. The pair spoke last night, and Biden reportedly told the Prime Minister to take the win and not retaliate. But will Netanyahu listen?
Netanyahu has, for years and years and years, wanted to hit the Iranians. So to an extent, this is the opportunity he's always wanted. But at the same time, it just so happens to take place with the war in Gaza underway and with Israel's international reputation rock bottom. So ultimately, I think Israel will probably be pressured into not responding immediately.
Biden spoke with the G7 today to push for a diplomatic resolution. At a time when America's role in the Middle East has been questioned, the unified response to defend Israel was a welcome sign of Western power. As Biden oversaw events in the Holy Land, Donald Trump was preaching to the converted in Pennsylvania.
May God bless the people of Israel.
The former president used his favored line that all this was a failure of policy unimaginable when he was in the White House.
The weakness that we've shown.
Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson has said there will be a vote this week on more funding for Israel. That had been held up in the House because it was attached to funding for Ukraine, something some Republicans oppose.
We cannot possibly support Ukraine and Israel and our own defense needs in the way that these guys demand. So I think we should focus. I think Israel's a much closer ally.
With all eyes on what Israel decides to do next, it could prove decisive to America's role in the region and decisive too in who wins the White House. So President Biden's being pulled in two different directions here domestically. On the one hand, he's trying to shore up his Democratic base, so he's urging restraint from Israel and calling for the ceasefire in Gaza. On the other hand, Republicans are saying he needs to retaliate against Iran, and that's why they want military funding for Israel, but not to Ukraine. They see Iran as a threat, not Russia. Yet interestingly, of course, President Zelensky said that the Iranian drones that were used last night against Israel, they're the same drones that are used by Russia against Ukraine. Ultimately, whatever Biden does between now and November, it will constantly be scrutinized here at home, regardless of whether it calms matters abroad.